I'm sure you would have heard of the hyperwars.
Yes.
Hyperwars is to basically deal with those dark AI bots, which are actually sitting out there. So there are no longer script kiddies or hackers who are trying to intrude. There are routines which are trying to intrude from the dark web or maybe the dark AI web, right? And then from that perspective, how do you identify? So this is a trajectory. And of course, CISOs need to, again, I would stress on learn, unlearn and relearn because today, the adversary is essentially not an individual sitting on the other side of the computer, but it's actually a routine which is trying to penetrate into your environment.
Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of the Gaurav Batra Show. As organization embrace remote work, cloud computing and Internet of Things, the cyber threat landscape has grown more complex and dynamic than ever before. This has turned focus on the role of the CISOs who need to seamlessly integrate technology, risk management and business acumen to proactively safeguard organizations against evolving cyber threat while fostering innovation and driving digital transformation. So, are the CISOs ready? To have a discussion on this amazing topic, I have along with me Akshay Garkel. He is partner and leader cyber at Grant Thornton Bharat LLP, a distinguished business leader with over 23 years of experience in information and cybersecurity, spanning various geographies including India, APAC and ME. His areas of expertise encompass a relevant blend of cybersecurity, business acumen and practice governance. He is mentor, cyber speaker, trainer, enthusiast, and a great learner. Let's have a word with him. Hi Akshay, welcome to the GB Show.
Thank you so much for having me over, Gaurav.
Pleasure is all mine. Akshay, as we announced, today's topic that the CISOs need to be ready, right? So just to start the conversation, I will like to ask you, with the business landscape changing in our country and India heading to become a $5 trillion, what do you think is a current and upcoming trend, and how does the impact the security trajectory of business we have?
Thank you so much, Gaurav, and I think it's a great question. As we all know, right, India is actually heading to become the third largest economy of this in the world, and we've got businesses in various industries. Whether you talk about digital native space, you talk about mid market, you talk about agriculture, you talk about large fintechs, you talk about the payment ecosystem, auto industry. Then again, look at unicorns and sunicorns and so on and so forth. All essentially are basically going to see progress as we move forward. We've also seen that there is a large third-party ecosystem today as far as businesses are concerned. And that ecosystem essentially is also on the growth trajectory. Foreign direct investments are welcome today in all of these sectors in the industry that we mentioned. While having said so, agility is the new mantra. And when you say time to market, essentially being supported by a lot of advanced tech solutions such as AI, ML, blockchain, and so on and so forth. Obviously, with all of this paradigm shift and the way the country is essentially moving, the attack surface for businesses also is moving, and it's only increasing as the day progresses, and definitely brings a set of its own challenges for the CISOs to deal with such shifts.
Okay, awesome. And agility is the new mantra which you said. That's a great statement.
Absolutely.
And I would like to take this further on the governance side. With cyber attacks getting more sophisticated and regulations, tightening, the governance becomes a critical aspect of CISOs, to consider. So even a recent research which we have looked into, 40% companies believe their cyber strategies will outdated in other 2 years, right? So how can CISOs realign their approach given the evolving threat and compliance demands?
Absolutely. In fact, 2 years is a long time. The way the threat landscape actually is moving, and it's so dynamic, I can tell you. It's important, for various cyber initiatives within the organization to be aligned with the overall business strategy. That is one. Second is, organizations should actually look to adopt a unified security framework, and that basically spans across various platforms and applications of the cloud and so on and so forth. So it's cutting across the entire length and breadth. Getting a fair amount of automation for predictive analysis of various threat vectors to business based on, I would say, dynamic decision making. What that really means is that business is dynamic. The entire landscape is changing. As I mentioned, agility is the new mantra. So because of that, you would basically have various vectors which will essentially play an important role in decision making. Now that decision making will be dynamic again. It's not like you've taken a decision today that will stand good in the next quarter or the next quarter and so on and so forth. However, at the same time, you have to run operations. You cannot keep revisiting the strategy all the time. So hence, can I create a mechanism which will essentially automate that decision making process and help me align on the fly based on whatever changes that I see in the environment. Apart from that, how do I kind of monitor the health state of my posture through dashboarding? And dashboarding is a very common term that we've seen in the industry today. But of course, it is important that not only the controls that you select for dashboarding, but what is really important is also to see how those controls are actually operating effectively, and that is something which is very key. Of course, security policies have to be updated at all times, and that's what we know today. And not only the policies are written through documentation, but litmus test to actually simulation exercises, wargaming exercises is something which has become the mantra for most of the businesses. And I think some of the most mature businesses do follow this to the T. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I think 2 points which I would like to take it further from when you mentioned is a unified security framework, and you mentioned a lot of stress on the automation. So can you give more lights on that?
Sure. So if you look at any unified security framework or per se unified controls framework per se, what happens there is you actually first try to map your business and see what are the relevant security controls to your business. After which you kind of identify those controls. Now, whether you manage the controls manually is one thing, but if you're handling high volume of data, then handling those controls manually becomes a very tedious exercise. And some of the mature businesses go for automation. Once you basically identify those controls, you normalize them. The normalization is where you actually map them to different standards. And while you map them to different standards, you basically try to write one single set of control which cuts across multiple standards and which are common across standards. Now the common is not only in word but also in meaning, right? Then essentially you go ahead and map against the industry standards. Once you've done that, then you also create organization units, and you look at which control is applicable to which business function in my environment. Whether you talk about IT, you talk about tax, you talk about finance, you talk about cyber as a function, you talk about internal audit, or for that matter, even the governance as a function, right? And then, of course, port everything on a dashboard, coming to my point on automation. And after you port them, you kind of monitor them in near real time.
Awesome. And actually, even if I look into this, data breaches are still becoming very common these days. Or we have seen like how the bad actors are deploying brute force attack, TDOS, complicated ransomware attacks, credentials, personal information, financial records are getting stolen and, sold on the dark web. So how has the role of the modern CISO evolved to proactively prevent breaches, swiftly detect intrusions, and mitigate financial and reputational damages? How we can look into that?
Great question. I think the role of a CISO is constantly to learn, unlearn, and relearn. If you look at certain advanced threat detection vectors or mechanisms that actually leverage advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence or certain modules which can predict certain threat vectors. You look at machine learning to actually identify unusual patterns and behaviors. Then, of course, also you look at engage with threat intelligence providers. I think that is very important because they have done their research and they're constantly doing research, not only for your environment, but also for what is happening across the dark web, what is actually happening across the deep web, where are the chatters and so on and so forth, and also gain fair bit of insights, right, into these environments and collaborate on threat assessments, right? How do you kind of create a threat posture for your organization from that perspective? The other area is implementing zero trust. I think zero trust is very important, where you actually assume breach at all times. You basically validate, on continuous basis, even if you basically authenticated, and then of course, you kind of then assess the insider threat, and then try to identify that what could be potential threats that you're sitting on, and obviously unauthorized access. There's another term which is called as hyperwars. I'm sure you would have heard of the hyperwars.
Yes.
Hyperwars is to basically deal with those dark AI bots, which are actually sitting out there. So there are no longer script kiddies or hackers who are trying to intrude. There are routines which are trying to intrude from the dark web or maybe the dark AI web, right? And then from that perspective, how do you identify? So this is a trajectory. And of course, CISOs need to, again, I would stress on learn, unlearn, and relearn, because today, the adversary is essentially not an individual sitting on the other side of the computer, but it's actually a routine which is trying to penetrate into your environment.
Yes, CISOs always need to do a lot of things, learn, unlearn, and also right now everyone is making noise around DPDPA 2023, right? So that has come. So what CISOs need to consider apart from the existing mandate and regulations they need to have?
Sure. I think as we are all aware that the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, now it's an act, no longer a bill, essentially has received the President's assent and has been put in the Gazette as well. It's basically nothing but a principle-based law, and which is up for delegated legislation. What that means is that by the time the law gets implemented, there will be a lot of discussions and considerations which will come up, and the government is estimating anywhere between 8 to 10 months from the time the copy got gazetted. As we are aware that the law attracts very high penalties, and those penalties are right up to 250 crores, apart from the other penalties which are mentioned in that. We've also basically seen that the stakeholders, being data principals, data processors, data fiduciaries, and significant data fiduciaries, formation of the data protection board, with appointment of data protection officers and consent managers, especially in the case of significant data fiduciaries. We've seen that DPDPA essentially is nothing but a comprehensive legal framework, right, for managing digital personal data within the country, with consent mechanisms and the right of individuals, and clearly listing down the obligations in terms of what every organization needs to do. The whole Gazette essentially, or the Act essentially, is broken down into 9 chapters, as we agree. Now, what really CISOs need to do, right? It is nothing but a multifaceted strategy that CISOs need to adopt through a very complex cyber landscape, right? For example, if you've seen that in an environment, we've got personal information which is floating, we've got sensitive information which is floating. What is really important is for CISOs to kind of first identify where that information is there. Second is, once you've identified, you kind of see across which business processes that information flows. Do a complete data flow analysis. I'm sure with businesses which are already compliant to GDPR or essentially have taken their journey on data governance, they already have a fair amount of data flow analysis done. They have data classification which they have done. They've also kind of moved forward one step ahead in terms of doing data discovery at regular intervals, and then also looking at how they are handling that information. Once you've identified, then you apply the data protection controls across that area where you identified in terms of the personal information which is flowing within the organization. The other aspect is the third-party ecosystem, because if you look at a concept called data processor, which has been defined in the Act as well, all the third parties which actually handle information on my behalf as an organization also will be carrying a lot of personal information. And any breach happening from that end, right, will still hold me as an organization or a data fiduciary accountable to those particular. And then, of course, in case if the breach happens and there are further investigations and things which are happening, it is really, really important for organizations to run that investigation, and against the investigation, identify how strong their breach response mechanisms were.
Okay.
And again, CISOs play a very vital role in all of these. While we say that, for significant data fiduciaries, it is important to hire a data protection officer. And from that standpoint, the data protection officer essentially will look at the legal, IT, compliance aspects. And of course, they will formulate strategies to encompass both techno-legal aspects within the privacy gamut of the framework. In addition to that, the governance of data in terms of the entire data lifecycle, whether it is right from data creation, right to data onboarding, data at storage, and so on and so forth, to even data archival and destruction, right? It is really important to monitor that perspective. And while that happens, personal information which is floating within that is really important. Now let me just throw some aspect or light on certain examples of what could be personal information. Of course, we are aware that age, gender, Aadhaar card detail, personal details, your preferences are personal and sensitive. But at the same time, if you look at a hospitality industry, food allergies, my food preferences, my travel trends also is a personal information. You look at financial services sector. There you have the payment ecosystem, the payment strings, which carry a lot of personal information, which includes my card details, my CVV details, and so on and so forth, is a personal information. You look at a technology company, they will be carrying a lot of records of employees. They will be carrying a lot of records of third parties, depending on what line of business they are in. That will essentially have, again, very sensitive information like age, gender, and so on and so forth. Healthcare industry will carry health records, right? And that's where I would like to emphasize that this act essentially empowers every individual, whether they are employees, whether they are third-party individuals, or they are citizens of the country, the right to kind of revoke their information or the right to basically give consent to revoke and ask the organizations to no longer carry this information with them. And that is the right to erasure. And there's one more part, which is the, at the time of demise of that individual, you can even nominate and have a nominee to whom that information can be shared. And that is again a concept of digital inheritance.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome, Akshay. And I think you have given it a quite elaborated answer. And during this conversation, you mentioned a lot about investigations and CISO's work, which goes over there. So even I think with this law as well, but most of the data protection laws, they warrant the strong incident management processes, right? So can you elaborate on the importance of evidence collected through the well-defined incident response mechanism for legal proceedings related to cybersecurity breaches?
Thank you, Gaurav. Well, I'm not a lawyer per se, but definitely will make a sincere attempt to answer this question. So, you look at strong response practices, incident response practices. They basically assist in making sure that, the evidence, it basically assists in evidence collection, which basically make it admissible in the court of law. And then, of course, they also form a digital trail that outlines the entire, life cycle of a cyber incident. This evidence actually can establish various factors, again in the court of law, which means the timelines of the event, the nature of the breach, the response efforts which were undertaken, and any impact on the data in the systems, right? And that also forms a part of the root cause analysis that generally regulators or regulated entities are obliged to submit to regulators. And of course, CERT, as we know, that once the incident is identified, within 6 hours, a root cause analysis has to be submitted to CERT. Courts can actually consider this evidence to ascertain the extent of liabilities and even the level of negligence, right, if at all, any, exhibited by the parties which are involved.
Okay, awesome. So, Akshay, you are not a lawyer, but I know you are a great speaker, right? Recently, you spoke at G20 summit on cybersecurity, which had members across nation, agencies, government, and private sector over there, right? So, how can CISOs contribute to the government's position of becoming the global cybersecurity leader for the G20 and other nations?
Thank you, Gaurav. It was actually a great honor to be invited as a commentator at the G20 summit. And the summit essentially was on crime and security in the age of NFTs, AI, and metaverse. And I had the honor and the opportunity to speak, on the topic of, the framework for international cooperation, given the criminal use of ICTs, right? And I kind of covered a few areas, in my humble consideration, where we spoke about information and intelligence sharing across G20 nations. Spoke about the harmony of legal framework, technical and skill development, very important because we say that we are looking, the country is looking for a minimum of 11 lakh cyber soldiers and above. We got cross-border investigations. How do we ease that cross-border investigation? And then the public-private partnership, where we have the private organization basically give the overall technical backbone, whereas the public organizations come up with the policies and the legal assistance and the legal framework. While we speak about that, I also spoke on how the information sharing initiatives on threat intelligence best practices can actually assist in reducing the threats, or at least the probability of occurrence of those threats, comply with the agreed upon principles, especially demonstrating adherence to commitment and guidelines of those treaties. We've seen treaties at bilateral level, multilateral level. So, how do you kind of unify the treaty between all the nations? Allocate resources, right, including time and expertise to contribute to those initiatives. Capacity building, fostering a cyber culture all across the nations, and especially if you look at citizen safety, safe usage of internet. And then, of course, we've also been seeing, Gaurav, that so many wars essentially are being fought, and cyberspace is becoming a very predominant space to fight wars apart from the physical warfare. So from that perspective, now sorry to digress, but coming to the topic of how CISOs can contribute to this, right? And I think it's a fantastic question that you've asked. The CISOs essentially, which are working for organizations, and those organizations are already under the purview of national critical importance, are already contributing in their way, right? And how they're contributing is to basically, sharing of information, reporting to the authorities, reporting, to their compliance teams, also reporting to their boards, etc. And then, of course, community at large, which again, and while they're applying those controls, they are actually protecting those organizations. And while those organizations are being protected, indirectly or directly, they are contributing to the safety of the, or I would say the cyber safety of the country, and thereby contributing to the economy of the country and making, this nation, continue to make this nation a vibrant economy.
Yes, exactly. We will make this nation a vibrant economy together. And I think, Akshay, it's a great talking to you. Always. I guess this session is going to be quite insightful for all the CISOs. I hope they are going to make use of this well. And thank you for being on my show. And there's a small ritual which I will like to give you as a token of appreciation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really
and thank you. Thank you everyone for watching this, and stay tuned. I'll see you next Sunday. Till then, take care. Be safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.